We're gathered together here, Dr. Frankl, on the 12th of February, 1977 at Pacific School of Religion, first of all to honor you, and then to make public the announcement of the Frankl Library and Memorabilia at the Graduate Theological Union. We're particularly interested today in your published writings, and I note that your latest book in English has an intriguing title, The Unconscious God. And it occurs to me that this is an unusual title for a psychiatrist to give to one of his books. I wonder if you'd comment a bit on that book.
It's a deplorable state of affairs that such a title should be unusual or challenging a psychiatrist, because it depicts the actual situation, and this is that for too long a time psychiatry has closed its eyes toward a phenomenon such as religion. Because religion is also a human phenomenon, and any human phenomenon should have been taken into account and taken at face value by psychiatry. Instead, for too long a time, as I said before, psychiatry, more specifically psychoanalysis, even more specifically Freudian psychoanalysis, has tried to convince us that religion is no more than just a collective, compulsive, obsessive neurosis of mankind, that God is no more than just the projection of a father image, and so forth. And what I think is that psychiatry, or for that matter psychology, should remain open without selecting certain phenomena that it allows to be existent. It should be open to all human phenomena. And one of the most important phenomena in human life is man's reaching out for a meaning to his existence. And even more, his reaching out for an ultimate meaning to existence. And this believing in the existence of ultimate meaning is the root or the crown of religion. And this, in this sense, in this widest possible sense, religion is also an entirely human phenomenon and has to be taken at its face value rather than being dismissed as a symptom of neurosis of one aspect of the Oedipal situation, and so forth.
So it's quite natural for you then to use religious terminology, even
this doesn't mean, Professor Leslie, that religion is only a human phenomenon. But I, as a psychiatrist, am entitled only to focus on the naturalness, on the humanness of the phenomenon called religion.
Yes. And of course, one of the reasons that we at Pacific School of Religion and in the Graduate Theological Union are interested in your work is that we can take your work and extend it into the religious dimension.
There is a transition. There is a bridge possible. And all of us are trying to build up bridges rather than to destroy them. Bridges of understanding. Bridges, or bridges, as one might say as well, leading from one dimension into the next higher dimension. Why do I emphasize this dimensional view on the world of man over against the divine world, the more encompassing world? Because if we only speak of levels or layers, we separate and sever one realm from the other. But when speaking of a higher over against a lower dimension, what I'm thereby bringing in is that a higher dimension is to be defined as the more inclusive dimension. This means the higher dimension, say the dimension of theology, includes the human dimension. Theology includes anthropology. This means that there is no mutual exclusiveness, but mutual inclusiveness. Theology simply cannot arrive at a truth that contradicts the human truth, but a truth that goes beyond, that surpasses the human truth. And on the other hand, man need not fear that he will meet contradictions or will have to deny his humanness when he transcends his human world toward the divine world. He has not to deny his humanness, but he will fulfill his humanness, something that might be very familiar to you, as far as I know. Forgive my partial ignorance. There has been said that Jesus came to fulfill the law and not to deny it. Is that correct?
Not to destroy it, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there is some parallelism.
Indeed,
right?
there is.
That's a very interesting point, Dr. Frankl, because there's been a lot of talk, particularly here at places like GTU, where theology and psychology intertwine themselves so closely. One of the big issues I have found in the last couple of years has been, what is the difference between psychotherapy and spiritual direction? You know, and it seems as though as we concentrate on it, the questions always keep coming up: what comes first, what comes second, what's of greater value, what's of lesser value. But it seems as though when we deal with spiritual direction in that realm, we're always dealing with something. I always have the feeling that I'm dealing with the word possibilities. And when I'm dealing with psychotherapy, I'm dealing with realities, you know. So somehow for me, logotherapy has been I see logotherapy as on the continuum between psychotherapy and spiritual direction. It is a piece of both. It's my way of
A missing link.
It is. It makes it. It brings the two.
Yes,
it weds the two together.
Yeah, I just want you to recognize that at the moment we speak of dimensions, a higher as a more inclusive dimension, it's incomparable. It becomes incompatible. See, you cannot measure, you cannot say one is of a higher value or of a lower value, but one is encompassing the other. And so you see, if I draw if you think of a square that way in perspective view, and then you may construct a cube on the basis of that square. Now you cannot say there is a contradiction between a square and a cube. You may consider the square as the projection of the cube down into a lower dimension, into the two-dimensional plane over against the three-dimensional space. On the other hand, if you are enlarging which word did you use? Something similar. Enlarging, transcending the plane of the square, you will arrive at a cube. But these are two different dimensions, and you can't compare them because one is the more encompassing, more inclusive dimension. But let me, in addition to pointing out, as I improvisingly try to do, that the humanness of man is fulfilled and not denied in the next higher dimension of theology over against anthropology. The same also holds for various psychological concepts. For instance, the great American psychologist, the late Abraham Maslow, has taught us to try to actualize ourselves, actualize our potentials. It's all okay, and the greatness of the spirit called Abraham Maslow was evidenced by the fact that he didn't mind my heavy criticism on this theory, but finally in his latest writings fully acknowledged that I was right in pointing out that self-actualization is all okay, but you can obtain it, you can arrive at it. It is available to you only on a detour, as it were, via meaning fulfillment, or to use a more comprehensive term, via self-transcendence. If you are transcending yourselves by giving yourself, if you are forgetting yourself, if you are not caring for yourself, nor for your own self-actualization or the actualization of your potentialities, then you are actualizing yourselves by forgetting and giving yourselves via self-transcendence. And so you see, there's also no mutual exclusiveness. You are fulfilling Abraham Maslow's recommendation, a man should actualize himself, by not caring for it, by your self-transcendence. So it's not to be denied what Abraham Maslow taught, but it arrives, it can be maximized, it can be brought to its fullest development via self-transcendence.
And you also mentioned in your writings, or perhaps in just talking to me, that self-actualization can be not only towards meaning, but also can be towards our more basic desires and instincts. I can actualize myself as my potentials for criminality, or I can self-actualize myself as to the higher dimension. So I can self-actualize myself into a higher dimension or into a lower dimension. And
this is right, Dr. Frankl. This is a danger, a threat inherent in the concept of self-actualization, that the question only starts with that business of actualizing one's own potentialities. Which potentialities within myself should be actualized, which are worthy of being actualized. And you might remember, you are one of the best knowers of the literature in the field, that once I'm pointing out, for instance, Socrates confessed that he harbored within himself the potential to become a criminal. Now, should he had self-actualized himself, he would have, this self-actualization would have included becoming a criminal. You must be selective, not only vis-a-vis of the world and the possibilities the world offers you, life is offering you by each and every concrete life situation confronting you. You have also to become selective as to yourself. And so the business of the value, you cannot circumvent, is that the right expression? Yeah. Circumvent the value decision, the decision making. And that is why I prefer to start and to wind up with the concept of meaning. A situation confronting me has a meaning inherent and dormant. It is a call and a challenge addressed to me, and I have to respond. And this business of responding is one of the fundamental features characterizing human life, human existence. It's responsibleness, not in the sense, the moralistic sense of responsibilities I have to fulfill, but of deeply, profoundly being responsible by responding, or better to say, responding in a responsible way. And so I have to make a choice incessantly. What is demanded of me by a situation, or what is demanded of me in terms of which potentiality to actualize? I might be inclined to be lazy. I might be inclined to be a perfectionist. Now, which way to steer through Scylla and Charybdis? See, between the extremes, incessantly you are confronted with the necessity to make choices. And this is by the, you see, you have rightly pointed out that there is a danger inherent in the concept of mere self-actualization, a danger in terms of becoming indiscriminate.
Yes, and also in seizing upon any meaning And one of the reasons that we're interested in this theological community in logotherapy is that we see that the search for meaning by itself is not enough, except as the search for meaning is brought within some world of values.
But why, Professor Leslie? Because as long as you speak of a search for meaning in the typically, forgive me as a guest, but in the typically American style, we in Europe have bought this style already, so we are to be blamed still more than you. We have come up with that style of subjectivism, and we have bought it. You know that I'm used to point out the difference between Europeans and Americans in the following way. The Americans are picking up the best from Europe and trying to transplant it to their own country, where the Europeans are picking up the worst from America and trying just to ape and mimic it. See? Yeah. And so we are still more have to blame ourselves. But let me say this, typically in your literature, the typical subjectivistic slant conceives of meaning a priori, right from the beginning, in subjectivistic terms. What do I mean thereby? Meaning is something you attribute and ascribe to things or situations or whatsoever. And this ascribing meanings to something is done in a more or less arbitrary way. This is not the truth. True meaning cannot be given. It has to be found. And it has to be found by your conscience. Conscience is the organon, the tool, the means to arrive at meaning. And you have to listen carefully to your conscience, to the voice of your conscience. And then go on and obey your conscience. This is a hard business. This cannot be done arbitrarily. Whether or not conscience is a terminal or rather something behind which transcendence is standing and speaking. This is the problem I've outlined in The Unconscious God. Now, leave it out of our present discussion. Anyway, conscience is something you have to listen to and you have to obey. Horchen and gehorchen in German. Horchen means listening, and gehorchen means obey.
Listen and obey.
By that, you see, Professor Leslie, by that I'm emphasizing the objective quality inherent in meanings, that they have to be sought for and found, hopefully, finally, rather than to be given more or less arbitrarily. And that's why I was stressing before the responding inherent in responsibleness. The situation is calling you. You have to listen what is meant by this call. And that's why I came to the conclusion that meaning, in one of my papers published by Maslow in his Journal of Humanistic Psychology, meaning is what is meant. What is meant by a situation. This is meaning, and it's a hard work to find out, to scent it out, to smell it out, you see, this meaning. But this is entirely based on the objectiveness, and the objectiveness of meaning is so hard to understand for any American who has been indoctrinated along the lines of subjectivism and pan-determinism and relativism and cynicism and nihilism and reductionism. Meaning, values, just what you ascribe to the world. Not anything you have to struggle hard to find out, to arrive at finally, to listen carefully. Just what you think of the world, that's meaning. Meaning is more.
I think this is one of the reasons why, when you were here before in the Bay Area, I remember you're speaking about the island of Alcatraz. Right at that time, there was discussion about what to do with Alcatraz, and you reminded us that on the East Coast, there is the Statue of Liberty.
And it would be apt and fitting if you would construct a statue of responsibility on the West Coast and suggested as the place to do so Alcatraz. Because people always think that the whole freedom is the whole story. But freedom, particularly here, not on this campus, this is an exemption from the rule, but all around you, freedom has already degenerated into license, arbitrariness, and permissiveness, rather than responsibleness. Permissiveness. That's what I had in mind. If you say just live out your free potential, you arrive at being indiscriminate, at being non-selective, and this is the demand of the hour, that we become ever more selective and discriminate. In an age where you are bombarded with stimuli, sexual stimuli, you become indiscriminate in your sexual life. Stimuli in spiritual, mental terms, ever-growing heaps of books and periodicals towering on your desks. You have to be discriminate and selective what to take up and to read, rather than let's take up this book and you read it and the other thing. The more meaningful things are in wait for you. So all this starts with your being selective and discriminate. Is discriminate a word or only indiscriminate?
Well, it communicates very nicely.
Why should I create words?
But I think the pendulum is swinging back now. I think until about 5 years ago, it was the great thing in Berkeley and probably all over the United States to do your own thing. Now people more and more realize that doing your own thing won't give you meaning unless you do your own thing in a responsible way, and that there are limits for toleration.
You're right, Dr. Faber. I would just formulate it in the following way: if you agree, if it's acceptable to you, you should do it. You should continue doing your own thing, but in the sense of that unique thing, that which your conscience, your own conscience, commands you to be done by you and exclusively by you, because meaning is unique, and each person who is going to fulfill this unique meaning in a unique situation, the person is also unique. So this twofold uniqueness makes for one's responsibleness. And in this sense, it is justified, it is sound to care for one's own thing. But in this sense, it is something that is no easy thing. You don't make it easy to yourself to live a responsible life if you do your own thing in the sense of what your own conscience commands you to do.
Well, it's not very, logotherapy is not appealing to people who want to do the easy things. And one of the things that I found most puzzling for young people, we talked about choices and we've talked about self and self-realization. Young people especially, say, I don't know which self I have to realize. I have so many selves. I develop from one self to the other. I'm one person in one situation, one person in another situation. What self am I supposed to realize?
You'd like me to try to...
well, no, does it go too far from the
unconscious? I would say, you see, it's better that people who don't understand the objectivistic approach inherent in logotherapy and so forth, that such people keep away from logotherapy, because otherwise there's a danger that they misuse it as an alibi. Logotherapy also teaches do your own thing. But on the other hand, we should try not to lose these people, not because of gaining more adherence of logotherapy, but to let logotherapy, let them benefit from logotherapy. And so we should try to instill into them logotherapeutic concepts, but in their language. And that is precisely what I try to do. Let them speak of do your own thing, Even now they should continue speaking of that, but we might teach them, we might have something to say in addition, in interpreting, yes, but what is your own thing? And if they say, I have no self, or my self is changing, which self should I actualize? Then tell them, the less you try to find yourself and to actualize yourself, the more you care for the meaning out there in the world waiting to be fulfilled by you exclusively, the easier you will finally have actualized yourself. This is, I think, very important also.
Marianne, your particular interest is in dance, and dance and logotherapy, or dance and the whole world of spiritual concerns. Certainly, being yourself or finding yourself at the deepest level is a part of your interest and concern.
That's right. I have looked at logotherapy. I came to logotherapy before I really came into a study of movement. But now that I have been deeply involved into the study of the movement of the body, I'm beginning to find that logotherapy is a therapy of movement, because it takes one from the point of saying, what decisions shall I make? They grab at all kinds of things. I come at this from my own experience when I met a crisis of meaning in my own life. Kept looking for all kinds of answers. And I sought them out of therapists, I sought them out of books, I sought them out of friends. I sought frantically until I came to your book. And it was all summed up. You gave me the answer to finding meaning by telling me one thing. You said, do your duty, and you will find out what you are. And that meant accepting my responsibility. And I agree with you, Dr. Fabry, that is not an easy thing. And I don't think that's why people are so ready to listen, to what logotherapy has to say, because it puts the responsibility back on them. But I see that as taking them, as moving them through the process. I look at logotherapy as a process. And it's the process of becoming human by accepting that responsibility. And to me, I see so much fluidity and movement.
You have touched a point that is 2 points that are very important, as I deem. The first, it escaped my memory. I wanted to add it to Joe's remark, but now you came up with it yourself. But you used my words or my ideas, but really, the man, the great spirit, who first came up with this idea in very well put words, was Goethe. Goethe said, how can I know who I am? Never by contemplation, by contemplating myself, observing myself, but only by action. And then he continued wisely, and what should I do? Do what is the duty, the demand of the hour. Not escape into a realm of abstract moral ideals, but do what you have to do right now. See? Don't take it easy, as you also were stressing. This is important. And the second thing, now I have to shift the responsibility for this great idea from my shoulders onto those of Goethe. But I have also to shift the glory of an achievement from my shoulders to those of Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology. But it came to my mind while you were speaking that also logotherapy is emphasizing that the mind's or the spirit's essence is in a certain sense movement, moving toward a goal, moving toward a meaning, moving toward an aim. Now, Adler conceived of this goal-directedness in a different sense, in a sense, say, in a lower dimension. We logotherapists try to do it in the next higher dimension, in the dimension of the specific humanness of man. That is to say, we see man as a being reaching out for a meaning and following this meaning. You might remember that I once speak of a meaning always being ahead of being, so that being falls is abreast of meaning. Being has to follow the meaning, and I compare this with the presence of God in the form of a cloud during the migration of the Jew of Israel throughout the 4 decades through the desert. And then I say the cloud was ahead of Israel. Israel had to follow the cloud. And I have the question, what would have happened if the cloud, if God's glory had dwelt in the midst of Israel? It would have, there would have been fog, everything would have been blurred. And Israel would have gone astray rather than being guided in the right dimension. So meaning must always be ahead of being, so that being can move toward meaning. And here you have this movement, this in depth. You see, man is someone who has to move toward a meaning to fulfill. And I believe this dynamics, as I once called it, lower dynamics, are not only important, but something that might well speak to the spirit of a young lady who is focusing and working in the field of dance. But there's something else. For a man is a being who has to search for meaning, to fulfill a meaning, who has to set his work into the world by completing a task. But there is a possibility that we make ourselves our own work. And I believe this is the uniqueness of the art of dancing, that while the sculptor is working on a piece of stone, of marble, and creating a work, putting a work into the world, he will die, the work might remain. Or a painter is painting in an oil painting, or a writer is writing a book. What does a dancer do? He makes himself his own work. He becomes his own creation. His body, even his body, while all of us are working on ourselves by growing, trying to become what we have been meant to be, right? In this general sense, all of us do not, but always have to create ourselves. But a dancer is an artist who is even capable of making his body into his creation, artistic creation. Is this nonsense?
No, it's not.
Say it.
Martha Graham has a beautiful quote. She says that in dance, one reveals the interior landscape. And she said it's a constant process of becoming. Yeah. You know, and there is nothing that stands between the dancer and anyone else, because the dancer is so vulnerable. They place themselves there.
Self and the world merge in dance.
Yes, very.
Dr. Frankl, one of the things that I think our students in this community would be interested is in hearing from you how your ideas have changed over the years. And does logotherapy look like the same kind of a system of thought today that it did when you first formulated it, even prior to the concentration camp experience?
This question comes as a surprise, of course. I've never been asked this question, at least not in this succinct form. But may I remind you of what I said before we came here? You spoke about how I'm looking, and I said why I'm looking like any man of 70, nearly 72. And then I said, I have nothing to object against my aging, really aging, as long as I feel justified in also claiming that to the extent to which I'm aging, I'm still also maturing. And I asked Bob how I notice, how I can know whether or not I'm still maturing. That's a very simple thing. As long as I'm dissatisfied by a manuscript I've completed 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks later I'm dissatisfied and not rather than being content, I believe that I'm still maturing. Now I may say the same for the decades in which I've tried to set up something such as logotherapy, or better to say lay the foundations for logotherapy that you and Joe Fabry and all our friends are really only completing by building on the ground, on the foundation that I tried to lay. Well, it's very hard to me to read my own books in the former editions of 30 years ago. Frankly speaking, I'm bothered by I wouldn't say the moralistic overtones, but that I make it so easy to our adversaries to finish us off, to try to finish us off. Because my old-time formulations can be misinterpreted in a moralistic sense. And only later on, when I detached myself, or as according to Nietzsche, any good disciple should do to grow beyond his teacher and his master, when I tried to go beyond Max Scheler, who influenced me so deeply, only then I tried to have people understand logotherapy doesn't mean it in a moralistic sense, in the sense of you should, you have to, but in the sense of your own fulfillment, that you can obtain your own fulfillment only by self-transcendence, by forgetting yourself, by giving yourself. That the more you think of yourself, the more you think, say, of your own orgasm, of your own potency, the more you are failing, you are doomed as a human being involved in sexual activity. The more, on the other hand, you live out your self-transcendence also in erotic terms, also, forgive me, but let's say in a very brutal way, to the extent that you live out your self-transcendence in bed, the more potent you are, the more orgasm you obtain, and the more you arrive at fulfillment. But this presupposes that you don't make it as easy and see in sex, even in marital life, nothing but sex. You're confronted incessantly today, all over the world, today with people who think the main problem in marriage is sex. There is no accordance, there is no synchronicity, and so forth. The best marriages I know are those in which sex plays the smallest role or a minor role, but is fulfilling and satisfying because it is not made the center, because it is not made the cornerstone. Because these people forget about sex and give themselves, and then they are potent, they have orgasm, everything without problems. But the more they center on this problem, and the more they try to be perfect masters of sexual technology, the more they are doomed, understandably. You know that happiness, including sexual happiness, cannot be pursued, but has to ensue by not paying attention to it. Joe has had such cases in his clientele, cases that I've oftentimes published already, quoted already from you. You permitted me to do so. Excellent illustrative cases that show down to earth how much this self-transcendence is not any highbrow, abstract, ivory tower, ontological business, but down to earth, down to bed, one might say. Self-transcendence goes down to the biological roots of a human being. Just consider, I'm recommending all, just consider our eyes. Our eyes are self-transcending in the strictest sense of the word, namely that our capacity to visualize, our capacity to perceive visually the surrounding world is entirely contingent upon our eyes' incapacity to see themselves. Once my eye sees around this light here a halo of rainbow colors, I know as a physician that I'm suffering from a glaucoma. At the moment I see a cloud here, I know it might be that I'm suffering from a cataract. Then my eyes perceives its own cataract, its own glaucoma. But a healthy eye never sees anything of itself, except for if you look into a mirror. And it's the same. A healthy person, or more cautiously to formulate, the less you care for happiness, for self-actualization, and so forth, the more you give yourself and forget yourself, the more, I don't say more or less, but the more or to the same extent you are fully human and you become fully yourself.
In the religious world, I think we would say this puts the first commandment first, that you start with the love of God, as
I
Joe.
wonder if I can add something to your question,
Please.
how logotherapy has changed over the year. And I want to remind you of something that you told me about a couple of years ago on a mountaintop where always the good things come out. And there you said,
what mountain?
The Austrians, of course.
Don't say anything against the Yosemite. I've been the first woman of the first rock climbing school in Yosemite Valley.
Well, I don't know what insights you have in Yosemite, but I know what insights you have in the Austrian Alps. And you said something to me that I remember all through the years, and I don't think I've ever seen it in print. And you said, what I found intuitively 40 years ago, as a very young student in medical doctor, now 40 years later has been established through scientific research by scientific polls. So maybe one of the changes would be that logotherapy started out as an intuitive insight, which over the year has been confirmed by statistics and by scientific research.
Joe, I was not even a medical student when the real basis of logotherapy, the basic ideas, have come to my mind. For instance, the idea that actually man should not ask what is the meaning of my life, but really should understand and interpret himself as him who is asked by life, that life is posing questions to him, that he has to respond and is responding by reacting to the challenges of life in a responsible way. This idea I've even uttered the first time at the age of 15 years when I was invited in a Volkshochschule extension course in a workshop on philosophy to read a paper. With 15 years I read a paper on the meaning of life, and this was this Copernican revolution, you see, was the main idea at that time. Also the idea that meaning can be found in life principally on three avenues: by doing a deed or creating a work, by experiencing something or lovingly encountering someone, but if need be, by finding a meaning in suffering by the very attitude we adopt toward it, by courageously shouldering our suffering, and so forth. This trichotomy of values plus hierarchy, that is to say that the meaning of suffering is either the highest possible or deepest conceivable meaning. This idea I had while I was in junior high school. But only in the last years, it has been, as you rightly said, empirically corroborated. No more or less than the dichotomy, creative and experiential and attitudinal values, has been arrived at by statistical and questionnaire research of nearly 4,000 subjects. This has been laid down in a dissertation at the Vienna University's Institute of Experimental Psychology. So it's strictly quantitative, empirical research, and even by factorial analysis, it has been confirmed that the potential meaning found in unavoidable suffering is higher, it's dimensionally higher. Psychologists speak of the orthogonality of an axis in factorial analysis. This has also been corroborated. And not to mention the logotherapeutic technique of paradoxical intention that was just derision. In a psalm you read, people have me in contempt and derision.
Ridicule?
Yes, derision. My life is full of the contempt by others. You see, for decades I was preaching, I was besieging psychotherapists, try paradoxical intention, consider the results, the therapeutic results. People, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists have obtained just after reading a book or a paper of mine. And independently, they have applied this technique and could arrive at such beneficial results. And it was just ridiculed. The paradoxical intention technique, which teaches patients to ridicule, if you wish to put it that way, their symptom, their neurosis, has been ridiculed itself by psychiatrists. And now, during the last years, the most outstanding, the most advanced, the most pioneering people, authors in the field of dying hard, experimentally oriented behavior modification techniques. Isaac Marx, the internationally most prominent man in the field of phobias and their treatment by behavior therapy. Hand, Lamontagne, Lazarus, the famous behaviorist, Volpi himself. All these people now recognize this technique within logotherapy is in the best sense good behavior therapy.
But they give it different names.
Not always. They came up most of them independently with their new techniques that mirror just and reflect one aspect of paradoxical intention. But what makes it justified in coming up with such more technical problems? The fact that when speaking of self-transcendence, I should not let you forget the fact that there is the second great human phenomenon, which is man's capacity to detach himself from himself, and this is lived out most beautifully, not only in a heroic way, but also in an ironic way, by humor. Humor is most human, and humor is used and implemented and included in this technique of paradoxical intention, something no other behavior technique has ever ventured. And now the most progressive therapists, they found out that not only humor is an important coping mechanism, as they call it, but they found out also in Montreal, for instance, die-hard behaviorists by experimentation, that the results are in fact superior to all other therapeutic effects obtained by other techniques, for instance, in obsessive-compulsive neurosis. So this is a great solace to me. Non omnis confunda. It was not in vain. And I take the contempt of 30 years. If I now, as an old man, can see that the harvest is what?
Ripe.
Pardon?
Ripe.
Riping?
Right for
Right.
the harvest.
All right. You see, as it is said in Job, you go to your grave as the shock of corn comes in its season.
You've been very gracious, Dr. Frankl, in sharing so freely and fully with us this afternoon, and we appreciate it very much. Appreciate having you with us too, Joe Fabry and Marianne Finch. Thanks all of you for being here.
I have to thank all of you.